between the different European publics. We had political difference, East versus West, North versus South, really trying to figure out what kind of values are behind these public perceptions. This happened through, first of all, pain, the pain of war, let's say, because we discovered that if you're not together, you're apart. And if you are apart, it can be a very painful experience, because conflict can only create a painful experience.
What is good science and technology policy or process? Are there any particular characteristics that one should look for?
Yes. Okay. The next $1 million question. To start with, yes, I've since the beginning, since also my PhD years, a long time ago, actually, I had this opportunity, which wasn't that obvious at the time, because it was the beginning of these international comparisons on science and technology perceptions, public perceptions. And that was also the first time that we really had the chance to look at how different publics, how different cultures see and assess science and technology policy, science and technology developments, particular developments at the time was in biotechnology. And immediately we saw that there were very significant difference, actually, even within Europe. Between the different European publics at the time. We're talking about the early 90s. And we had even this, the most obvious, also political difference, let's say, reflected in this perception. So it was East versus West, for instance, or North versus South. Things that we still see, of course, nowadays, but not as strongly, as significant differences as we once actually saw. And that started us actually going into really trying to figure out what kind of values are behind these public perceptions, the difference. That brought us to basically the political system that is also related to the values system that we see in the society, and how the political system reacts to this value system. And therefore we end up with very different policies when it comes to the science and technology and innovation, by the way, development. So if one must make a very, let's say, a crude summary of what makes a good policy. A good policy is both a policy that's socially sustainable. It is a policy that not only is aware of societal conflict, societal issues, let's say, societal concerns about a specific technology, and deals with these concerns, but also one that is trying to minimize the conflict via open debate, via an open science, as we call it nowadays, perspective, but also one that has a specific leadership. Shows leadership actually in this based on these values, because the values are there not only as vague, let's say, norms in society. They're written actually, written in our constitutions, written in our treaties, written in our strategies. So there are very specific values that we have to follow, and it is good if we stick with these values, because they are the result of very long discussions in society.
Were the discussions involving a diverse range of people, so the public as well as people who work in policy? How did those values get developed in the first place?
There is the should and how the should develop, and sometimes how they develop. What value is, it's already a contentious discussion. We don't have a common understanding of what creates, let's say, the value. What are the historical, let's say, a movement that has created a specific value in society. We have tried to do that, but there is also a limit to how one can go into this kind of discussion. I'd say that the value is a common agreement of what is right and what is wrong in society. And this common agreement is changing with time. So what is a good value today is not necessarily a good value tomorrow. The same thing that we have seen with in our work in public perceptions of science and technology. They change through time. That's a good thing, you know, they should change. Because the debate changed, the science changed, the development changed, the applications of the development changed a lot. So we should always be aware that the creation of a value is through a continuous feedback between science, policy, and society. And every now and then we need to, of course, to establish, to write them, if you like, in a kind of stone type of idea. So we create a treaty. Like we have in our case, we have the treaties in the European Union that created the European Union, and they specifically refer to the values of the European Union. And the same, of course, with the constitutions around the world. But one has to be, of course, open to this change. And the only way to be open to the change is to have a continuous debate, a continuous dialogue with society. And that's what we try to do as well. That is basically a big part of our job. And try to be a part, to oversee these dialogues that happen in society, and to, if you like, not exactly predict, because it's a strong word, but try to foresee what kind of issues and concerns we might have with the specific developments, specific scientific developments.
It's really interesting because obviously Europe is a very diverse, I mean, it's very diverse, different values, different cultures. And then we have the European Union, which you just said has a, you know, values set written down. So how was the prioritization, and how did those values, how did that align with national values? Because I imagine that'd be quite important when it comes to things like developing policies.
Well, not an easy task, but by the way, whenever I talk to my colleagues from I don't know, big countries like China, for instance, or even the US, and people will tell you that's okay, that's a European thing or whatever. We try to explain to them that Europe is not really a kind of single idea. It's not a single country. There are so many countries, so many ideas, you know, they're really different here and there. And then they tell you, yeah, well, it's exactly the same in our country. China is a single country as far as you know, you're concerned from there. But if you see it from inside, there are huge differences between, I don't know, urban and rural areas, between the east and the west, between the Cantonese and let's say the Mandarin language groups, and so on and so forth. And these are significant difference for them, but not for us. We see a kind of a single system. Now, of course, saying that Europe is still an amalgamation of 27 countries, let's say the European Union at least. And that means almost as many languages. And in terms of political systems, at least two big, let's say the East and the West type of system that came together in Europe, plus the traditional and historical differences between the different countries, between North and South, and so on and so forth. So for me, it has been a great achievement that we have created and kept more or less that European Union together. And this happened through, first of all, pain, the pain of war, let's say, because we discovered that if you're not together, you're apart. And if you are apart, it can be a very painful experience, because conflict can only create a painful experience. And through that dialogue that came after the conflicts, and this vision of that one has to cooperate as much as possible, then came this big, you know, decisions of opening the borders, for instance, so people can move from one country to the other, having the single currency, so on and so forth. So that helped a lot, actually, to create this common science and technology policy that we see nowadays. So the biggest research budget in Europe, it's actually the European Union. budget, as a single research budget. Of course, by the way, it's still, if you accumulate the research budget of every individual country, it's very small budget. By the way, it still represents only 5% of the accumulated, let's say 27 countries budget, but still as a single budget is the biggest in Europe. It's bigger than any single country. So that means that we have a budget that works for the whole of the European Union, for the benefit of the whole European Union. And that came only through a lot of discussions and negotiations, but also with a very good will, actually, to create a kind of common approach.